You're not going to believe this one, folks. I mean, I still sometimes shake my head wondering how it all even happened. I own a fair-sized ranch, good land, been in my family for generations. You'd think my biggest worries would be weather, or maybe coyotes eyeing the calves. Nope. My biggest headache, the one that nearly drove me to drink, came in the form of a couple of self-important, golf cart driving wannabe cops from the brand new, high and mighty HOA that had sprung up like a crop of particularly invasive mushrooms on our southern border. And the solution? Well, let's just say my grandpa, a man who's forgotten more about leverage and common sense than most people ever learn, decided it was time to deploy what he gleefully termed his suburban deterrent system. You might call them landmines of a different sort. Drop a comment down below if you've ever had one of those HOAs. Try to tell you how to live on your own property, and definitely let me know where you're watching from. Because this story is one for the books. It got crazy, it got petty, and ultimately, it got downright satisfying. My ranch, the Bar M, isn't some little hobby farm. We're talking over 1,000 acres of rolling hills, pasture, a bit of timber, and a creek that cuts right through the prettiest part of it. My great-grandfather staked this claim, and my grandfather, the aforementioned architect of our unique defense strategy, grew up on it, just like my dad, and just like me. It's more than land, it's legacy, and for all those years we coexisted peacefully with our neighbors, mostly other farms, and a sleepy little unincorporated village a few miles down the road. Then came Whispering Pines Estates. That was the name they gave the sprawling development of identical beige houses that ate up the old Henderson place, right up against our southernmost fence line. Suddenly, we had hundreds of new neighbors, and with them, an HOA board that seemed to think their jurisdiction extended clear to our front porch. The first sign of trouble was subtle, almost dismissible. A golf cart, one of those fancy ones with a little Whispering Pine security decal on the side, parked just a few feet inside our property line, under the shade of an old oak tree that technically belonged to us. The fence there wasn't much, just 3 strands of barbed wire, more to suggest a boundary than to physically stop anything determined. I figured, okay, new folks, maybe they're confused about the line. The first time I just waved. The 2 guys in it, wearing matching polo shirts a size too small and sporting mirrored sunglasses like they were auditioning for a low-budget cop show, just sort of stared back. The next week, it happened again. Same spot, same golf cart, same 2 aspiring action heroes. This time, I ambled over. "Afternoon, fellas," I said, trying to keep it friendly. "Just wanted to let you know, this here is actually part of the Bar M. The HOA property ends back at that survey marker." I pointed to the concrete post nearly hidden in the tall grass. The driver, a stout fellow with a permanent sneer who I'd mentally nicknamed Ranger Rick, barely glanced at it. "We're aware," he grunted, not even bothering to take off his shades. "We're just keeping an eye on things. Community safety, you know." Community safety? My community? Or theirs? "Well, I appreciate the vigilance," I said, still aiming for diplomacy, "but this particular spot is private property. We run cattle through here sometimes, and I wouldn't want your cart to get in the way or, spook them." Ranger Rick's partner, a younger, lankier guy I dubbed Deputy Dog, piped up. "We're allowed to be here. It's for observation." Allowed by whom? I wanted to ask, but I held my tongue. "Look," I said a little more firmly, "I'm asking you politely, please stick to your side of the fence. There's plenty of shade over there too." Ranger Rick actually scoffed. "We'll park where we deem necessary for the security of Whispering Pines." And with that, he put the cart in gear and slowly trundled back onto HOA land, not with any sense of apology, but more like he was humoring a slightly slow child. I stood there watching them go, a knot of disbelief tightening in my stomach. Deem necessary on my land? Oh, this was not going to be good. I could feel it in my bones, the same way I can feel a storm rolling in. The air had changed. That interaction was just the opening salvo, the first hint of the entitlement that was apparently a standard feature in Whispering Pines Estates. I went back to the house and told Grandpa about it. He was sitting on the porch swing, sharpening a knife with slow, deliberate strokes. He listened without saying a word, his pale blue eyes fixed on the distant hills. When I was done, he just spat a stream of tobacco juice into the petunias, Mom always hated that and said, "Sounds like they need learnin'." That was Grandpa's way of saying things were about to get interesting. He didn't elaborate, just went back to his knife, but there was a certain set to his jaw that I recognized. It was the same look he got when a piece of machinery wasn't behaving, right before he'd dismantle it to its core components and force it into submission. The HOA, I suspected, was about to become his new stubborn tractor. The next few weeks, the parking didn't just continue, it escalated. It was like my polite request had been taken as a challenge. Now, it wasn't just the golf cart. Sometimes it was a white SUV, also emblazoned with Whispering Pines Security, parked even further onto our land. Ranger Rick and Deputy Dog seemed to make it their personal mission to occupy that patch under our oak tree. They'd sit there for hours, sometimes with binoculars, looking out over our pastures. It felt invasive, like we were exhibits in their private zoo. I saw them jotting things down on a clipboard once. What were they observing? My prize bull Ferdinand taking a nap? The grass growing? It was infuriating. I tried a more direct approach. I installed new, very clear, private property, no trespassing, signs right on the fence posts facing their preferred parking spot. Bright yellow, black lettering, impossible to miss. The next day, one of the signs was torn down, lying bent in the dirt. The other had what looked suspiciously like a muddy boot print on it. That was when my patience, already worn thin, officially snapped. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This was deliberate, a calculated act of disrespect. This was them, quite literally, staking a claim on my land through sheer audacity. I took pictures of the damaged signs, of their vehicle clearly on my property, noting dates and times. I was starting to build a file, though I wasn't sure yet what I'd do with it. My next step was to try and engage the HOA leadership directly. I looked up their contact information online, not an easy task. They seemed to guard it like state secrets, and finally found an email address for the HOA president, a Mr. Arthur Prendergast. I drafted a polite but firm letter outlining the situation, stating clearly that his security personnel were repeatedly trespassing and requesting that he instruct them to cease immediately. I even attached photos. A week went by, nothing. Then, too, finally I received a reply. It wasn't an apology, it wasn't a promise to address the issue. It was a masterpiece of bureaucratic obfuscation and condescension. Mr. Prendergast, in prose so purple it nearly stained the screen, informed me that the Whispering Pines Community Safety Patrol operated under guidelines designed to ensure the tranquility and security of all residents. He implied that their presence near our property line was a visual deterrent to unspecified rural elements that might pose a threat to his pristine enclave. Rural elements? Did he mean my cows? Or perhaps Grandpa, when he was out checking fences in his 60-year-old pickup truck? The letter went on to suggest that if I had concerns, I should perhaps consider better delineating my property, as if the existing fence and survey markers weren't enough. There was no acknowledgement of the trespassing. No apology for the damaged signs, just a veiled implication that I was the problem. I read the email twice, then a third time, each pass making my blood boil a little hotter. This Prendergast fellow, whoever he was, clearly lived in a different reality, one where his HOA rules somehow superseded actual property laws. I showed the email to Grandpa. He read it slowly, his lips moving slightly. When he finished, he handed my phone back, a grim little smile playing on his lips. "Better delineating, huh?" he mused. "Well, son, I reckon we can help 'em with that. Some folks only understand a clear line when they trip over it." He winked, and I knew then that the learnin' phase was about to commence. Diplomacy had failed. Polite requests had been met with arrogance. It was time for a different approach. The quiet anger that had been simmering within me began to coalesce into a cold, hard resolve. They wanted to play games? Fine. But they were about to find out that this old rancher and his even older grandpa knew a few games of their own, games played with dirt and sweat and a deep understanding of the land they were so casually disrespecting. The gauntlet had been thrown down not by me, but by President Prendergast and his Keystone Cops. And we, the rural elements, were about to pick it up. The question was, what exactly did Grandpa have in mind? He was being infuriatingly vague, just humming to himself and spending a lot of time down by the south fence line with a tape measure and a notepad. occasionally kicking at the soil like a geologist searching for gold. The breaking point, the incident that truly cemented our resolve to take decisive action, happened on a blistering July afternoon. I was in the south pasture with my best ranch hand, Miguel, trying to coax a newborn calf and its skittish mother back towards the main herd. It was hot, dusty work requiring patience and a soft touch. Just as we were making progress, here comes the Whispering Pines SUV, bouncing over the uneven ground, kicking up a cloud of dust, and parking right in their usual spot, a mere 50 feet from where we were working. Ranger Rick and Deputy Dog hopped out, all officious self-importance, and actually leaned against our fence, arms crossed, watching us like we were the afternoon entertainment. The noise and sudden appearance of the vehicle spooked the mother cow. She bolted, the calf scrambling after her, undoing a good 30 minutes of careful maneuvering. I saw red. I stalked over to the fence, Miguel trailing cautiously behind me. "What in the Sam Hill do you think you're doing?" I yelled, forgetting all pretense of politeness. Ranger Rick, to his credit, didn't even flinch. "Just observing, sir," he said with that infuriatingly calm tone he always used. "Standard patrol." "Standard patrol?" I shot back. "You just cost me half an hour's work and scared my livestock. You are on private property and you are interfering with my operations. I want you off my land now." Deputy Dog, looking a little less confident now that I was visibly furious, muttered something about ensuring no suspicious activity. Suspicious activity? I almost choked. The only suspicious activity around here is you two trespassing where you don't belong. This is a working ranch, not your personal scenic overlook. Ranger Rick actually had the gall to adjust his mirrored sunglasses and say, "Mr. Prendergast has assured us our presence here is beneficial for community relations." I just stared at him, dumbfounded. Beneficial? He was either delusional or a pathological liar. "Community relations?" I said, my voice dangerously low. "Let me tell you about community relations. You and your boss are about one more stunt away from finding out what a formal trespassing complaint and a call to the sheriff looks like. Now, for the last time, get off my property." Maybe it was the mention of the sheriff, or maybe even his thick skull finally registered the level of my anger, but Ranger Rick finally motioned to Deputy Dog, and they climbed back into their SUV. They didn't leave immediately, though. They sat there for a good 5 minutes, engine idling, just to prove a point, I guess. Then, with a final, insolent rev of the engine, they backed out and drove away. I watched them go, shaking with a mixture of rage and frustration. Miguel just shook his head. "Patron," he said quietly, "these men, they have no respect." He was right. And it was clear that respect wasn't something they were going to give willingly. It was something we were going to have to demand or, more accurately, engineer. That evening, I recounted the incident to Grandpa. He listened, his expression unreadable, just methodically cleaning his old shotgun, a task he usually reserved for moments of deep contemplation or impending action. When I finished, he set the gun aside and looked at me. "All right," he said. "Time to stop fooling around with these city slickers. They want lines? We'll give 'em lines they won't soon forget." There was a glint in his eye that was part mischief, part steel. "They like that spot under the oak tree, do they?" He mused, more to himself than to me. "Reckon we can make it a little less hospitable." The next morning, Grandpa was up before dawn. I found him in the barn, rummaging through a pile of old irrigation equipment, pipes, sprinklers, timers, stuff we hadn't used in years, not since we'd upgraded the main pasture systems. He had that focused, almost obsessive look he got when he was deep into a project. "What you got in mind, Grandpa?" I asked, leaning against a stall. He grinned, a genuine, full-toothed grin that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Just a little landscaping, son, a little hydroengineering. Call it targeted soil moisture enhancement." He picked up a particularly large, rusty sprinkler head, the kind designed to throw water a country mile. "Think our friends in the golf cart will appreciate a bit of a morning mist?" The first step in Grandpa's grand strategy was reconnaissance and planning, a phase he undertook with the meticulousness of a seasoned general preparing for battle. He had me continue my documentation. Every time Ranger Rick and Deputy Dog parked on our land, I logged it. Date, time, vehicle, duration of their stay. I took photos from discrete locations, time-stamped and geotagged. Grandpa insisted on this. "Paperwork, son," he'd said, tapping his temple. "Good fences make good neighbors." But a good paper trail makes for an airtight case if these fools decide to get lawyers involved. While I played intelligence officer, Grandpa became the surveyor and engineer. He spent hours down by the south fence, not just near the problematic oak tree, but along a good 100-yard stretch. He had his old transit level out, squinting through it, driving stakes into the ground, muttering calculations to himself. He even got out the original survey maps from the county, comparing them to his own measurements, ensuring we knew our property line down to the inch. He discovered that the fence, in a few places, was actually a foot or two inside our true property line, a relic of old, less precise fencing methods. Good to know. He'd grunted, making a note. Always good to have a little extra wiggle room. We had a brief consultation with Ben Tracy, our family lawyer over in the county seat. Ben's a sharp guy, known for his no-nonsense approach. I laid out the situation, the persistent trespassing, the ignored warnings, Prendergast's dismissive letter, the interference with our ranch operations. Ben listened patiently, reviewed my growing folder of evidence, and then leaned back in his chair. "Well," he said, a slight smile on his face, "President Prendergast and his HOA are what we in the legal profession technically refer to as being in the wrong. Completely, unequivocally in the wrong. You're well within your rights to pursue legal action for trespassing, seek an injunction, the whole 9 yards." He confirmed that the HOA had absolutely zero jurisdiction or authority on our private land. Their claims of community safety patrols were irrelevant if those patrols crossed the property line without permission. However, Ben continued, legal action can be lengthy and expensive. Sometimes a more practical solution presents itself. He glanced at Grandpa, who just gave a non-committal shrug, though I saw the flicker of amusement in his eyes. "You have every right to manage your land as you see fit," Ben concluded. "As long as what you do is on your property and doesn't create a public nuisance or violate any specific county ordinances, you're golden. If they damage their vehicle on your land due to conditions you've created on your land, after being repeatedly warned not to be there, that's on them." That was all the confirmation Grandpa needed. His targeted soil moisture enhancement project began to take concrete, or rather, muddy shape. He wasn't just thinking about sprinklers anymore, he was thinking about the ground itself. He'd noticed that Ranger Rick and Deputy Dog always parked their SUV or golf cart in the exact same configuration, wheels, just so, to get maximum shade from the oak. Creatures of habit? Grandpa had chuckled. Predictable. That's their weakness. His plan as it slowly unfolded was diabolically simple yet elegant in its agricultural cunning. He decided to focus on a roughly 20 by 20 foot area directly under the choicest part of the oak's shade. First, using the small tractor with the tiller attachment, he cultivated the soil in that specific patch. Not deep, just enough to loosen the topsoil, make it look like we were preparing it for some sort of planting. Good aeration, he'd announced to an imaginary audience, promotes healthy root growth. Next came the irrigation components. He unearthed a collection of ancient heavy-duty agricultural sprinkler heads, big brass things that looked like they could put out a small flood. He meticulously cleaned them, replaced a few washers, and then, under the cover of dusk, we ran a discreet, shallowly buried water line from a nearby stock tank pump out to the cultivated patch. He positioned 3 sprinkler heads strategically, mostly hidden by clumps of tall grass we forgot to mow, all aimed directly at the target zone. These weren't your garden variety pop-up sprinklers. These were designed to throw a high volume of water with considerable force. The pièce de résistance was the timer. Grandpa found an old mechanical timer in the barn, the kind with chunky dials, and wired it to the pump. He set it to go off at irregular but frequent intervals during the times Ranger Rick and Deputy Dog were most likely to be enjoying our unauthorized shade, typically late morning and mid-afternoon. "Just want to make sure our new seed bed stays properly moist," he said, his face a perfect mask of innocence. But there was more. The soil moisture enhancement was only part 1. Part 2 involved making the ground itself less inviting. After tilling, Grandpa had me subtly, almost imperceptibly, sculpt the terrain within that 20 by 20 patch. He had me create a very shallow, almost invisible depression, a slight concavity that wouldn't be obvious to the eye but would collect any water the sprinklers delivered. Water needs a place to go, he explained. Or in this case, a place to stay. He then, accidentally, incorporated a few strategically placed, fist-sized rocks and some gnarled old tree roots just beneath the surface of the tilled soil, perfectly positioned where tires were likely to rest or try to gain traction. We covered them lightly with dirt, making them all but invisible. The final touch was a generous top dressing of rich, dark compost mixed with clay we dug out from the creek bank. Helps retain moisture, Grandpa declared, spreading it with a shovel. It also, I noted, had the potential to turn incredibly slick and sticky when saturated. The whole operation took about 2 days of intermittent work, time to avoid observation from the Whispering Pines side. To any casual observer, it would just look like we were working on a small patch of our land, maybe preparing for some new planting or erosion control. No one would suspect the carefully calibrated watery welcome that awaited the next uninvited guests. As we finished, Grandpa stood back, hands on his hips, surveying his handiwork. A light breeze rustled the leaves of the oak tree. The trap was set. It was subtle, entirely on our property, and, as Ben Tracy had confirmed, perfectly legal. Now, Grandpa said, a satisfied glint in his eye, we wait, and maybe, he added with a wink, we hope for a little rain to prime the pump, so to speak. I had to admit, it was a brilliant plan, relying on natural elements and their own predictability. It wasn't overtly aggressive, but it promised to be incredibly inconvenient and, with any luck, humiliating for our unwanted visitors. The anticipation was almost unbearable. We didn't have to wait long for the priming. A good summer shower rolled through that night, not a deluge, but enough to settle the disturbed soil and give Grandpa's targeted soil moisture enhancement area a nice pre-soak. The next morning, the sun came out bright and hot. It was a perfect day for seeking shade. Around 10:30 a.m., right on schedule, the white Whispering Pines SUV appeared, lumbering down the rough track towards our fence line. My heart started to pound a little faster. Grandpa, who'd been inspecting a fence post nearby with binoculars, gave me a subtle thumbs up. Ranger Rick was driving, Deputy Dog in the passenger seat. They pulled right up to their favorite spot, nosing the SUV into the shade of the big oak, their tires settling onto the exact patch of ground Grandpa had so lovingly prepared. For a moment, nothing happened. They cut the engine, and I could imagine them sighing in relief as they escaped the sun. I held my breath. Grandpa had set the first sprinkler cycle for 10:35 a.m. The digital clock on my phone ticked over. 10:34, 10:35, and then it began. With a sudden whumph and a series of metallic clack-clack-clacks, the 3 ancient sprinkler heads erupted into life. They weren't delivering a gentle mist. Oh no. They were spewing forth powerful, arcing jets of muddy stock tank water with the focused intensity of miniature fire hoses. All 3 streams converged directly on the Whispering Pines SUV. The effect was instantaneous and glorious. Water hammered against the windshield and roof with a sound like heavy hail. Muddy spray plastered the sides, instantly transforming the pristine white vehicle into a Jackson Pollock masterpiece of brown streaks. I could just make out 2 very startled figures inside gesticulating wildly. Ranger Rick fumbled with the ignition, trying to start the SUV. The engine caught, and he slammed it into reverse. The rear wheels spun, kicking up clods of now thoroughly saturated, clay-rich mud. Instead of backing out, the SUV just slid sideways a little, its tires digging deeper into the mire Grandpa had engineered. The front wheels, when he tried to go forward, did the same. They were stuck. Beautifully, comprehensively stuck. And the sprinklers just kept hammering away, clack, 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 dousing them relentlessly. After about 2 minutes, which must have felt like an eternity to them, the timer clicked off, and the sprinklers subsided, leaving behind a scene of utter muddy devastation. The SUV was coated. The ground around it was a soupy mess, and I could only imagine the state of the interior if they'd had a window even slightly open. Ranger Rick and Deputy Dog cautiously opened their doors, stepping out into the quagmire. Their polished black shoes instantly disappeared into several inches of greasy muck. Their expressions were a perfect blend of outrage and disbelief. Ranger Rick, his face puce, started yelling something, but his words were lost in the distance. He was clearly not happy. He slogged around the vehicle, slipping and sliding, his uniform acquiring a new earthy patina. Deputy Dog just stood there, looking forlorn, like a drowned rat. This was even better than I had hoped. Grandpa, who had moseyed up to stand beside me on our side of the fence, was fighting hard to keep a straight face, but his shoulders were shaking. "Looks like they're experiencing some unexpected irrigation," he observed, his voice laced with pure, unadulterated satisfaction. About 20 minutes later, after much slipping, swearing, I assumed, and futile attempts to rock the SUV free, a new vehicle appeared on the horizon from the Whispering Pines direction. It was a large, black, impeccably clean Lincoln Navigator, and at the wheel, I presumed, was the man himself, President Arthur Prendergast. He parked on his side of the fence, well away from the mud, and strode towards us, his face a thundercloud. He was a man in his late 50s, dressed in expensive-looking golf attire, crisp polo shirt, perfectly pressed khakis, gleaming white golf shoes. He looked utterly out of place against the backdrop of our working ranch, and even more so now, with his security vehicle mired in muck. "What is the meaning of this?" Prendergast bellowed, his voice tight with fury, as he reached the fence. Your sprinklers have disabled my security vehicle. This is an outrage. This is vandalism." Grandpa stepped forward, calm as a summer morning. "Mr. Prendergast, I presume?" he said, his tone polite but firm. "Name's Jedediah Thorne. Here's my grandson, owner of this ranch," Prendergast sputtered. "I don't care who you are, your contraption has caused significant damage. You deliberately targeted my patrol." "Now, hold on a minute," I interjected, stepping up beside Grandpa. "First off, Mr. Prendergast, your vehicle is on our private property. We've asked your men politely and repeatedly not to park here. We've sent you formal letters. You chose to ignore those requests. We were ensuring community safety." Prendergast blustered. "By trespassing?" Grandpa asked, raising an eyebrow. "Funny way to go about it. As for those sprinklers, we're just irrigating a new patch of ground cover we're trying to establish. For erosion control, you see. This here land gets a bit sparse under this old oak. Can't help it if your boys decided to park right in the middle of our agricultural improvement project." Prendergast's face was getting redder by the second. "This is a deliberate act of aggression." "I'm calling the sheriff." "You do that," I said calmly. "We've got a file about a foot thick documenting your crew's trespassing over the past few months, including photos of them damaging our signs. We also have a copy of your rather dismissive letter. I'm sure the sheriff will be very interested to hear all sides." Sure enough, Prendergast whipped out his phone and made a call. While we waited, Ranger Rick and Deputy Dog managed to extricate themselves from the mud bath, looking utterly defeated and filthy. They trudged over to Prendergast, muttering about ambushes and booby traps. When the county sheriff's deputy, a young woman named Miller, whom I knew casually, finally arrived, Prendergast launched into an indignant tirade about our malicious sprinklers and the damage to his precious HOA vehicle. Deputy Miller listened patiently, then turned to us. I explained our side, the ongoing trespassing, the ignored warnings, our right to manage our own land. I showed her the property stakes, clearly indicating the HOA vehicle was well within our boundaries. I offered to show her my documentation. Grandpa chimed in, "Just trying to grow a bit of grass, officer. Didn't expect folks to park their truck in our new seedbed, especially when it's clearly marked private land." Deputy Miller walked over to the mired SUV, looked at the sprinklers, then back at the property line. She sighed. "Mr. Prendergast," she said, turning back to him, "as far as I can see, your vehicle is on private property without the owner's permission. This is Bar M land. Any agricultural activity they undertake here is their business. If your vehicle got stuck as a result of conditions on their land while trespassing, I'm afraid that's a civil matter between you and them, or, more accurately, your problem." Prendergast looked like he was about to have an aneurysm. But they did it deliberately. "Can you prove they intentionally targeted your vehicle, knowing it would be there, versus them just watering their field?" Deputy Miller asked, her expression neutral. "This area," she gestured to the muddy patch, "is clearly being worked, and they did warn you to stay off." She then turned to Ranger Rick and Deputy Dog. "And gentlemen, I'd advise you to respect private property boundaries in the future. Continued trespassing could result in citations." With that, she wished us all a good day, suggested Mr. Prendergast, call a tow truck, and drove off, leaving a fuming HOA president, 2 mud-caked security guards, and a beautifully immobilized SUV in her wake. Grandpa just leaned against a fence post, pulled out a blade of grass, and started chewing on it, a tiny smile playing on his lips. "Reckon that seedbed," he said quietly to me, "is going to need regular waterin'." The first battle had been decisively won. The immediate aftermath of the Great Sprinkler Offensive was, shall we say, tense. President Prendergast did indeed call a tow truck, a massive rig that had considerable difficulty navigating the uneven ground on his side of the fence to even get a line to the stricken SUV. It took the better part of 2 hours, much winching, and a great deal of loud, frustrated shouting from Prendergast to finally extract the mud-caked vehicle. We watched the whole spectacle from our porch, sipping iced tea. Grandpa even got out his binoculars for a better view of the salvage operation, as he called it. He offered occasional commentary, mostly technical critiques of the tow truck operator's technique. The following week, we received a very stiffly worded letter from an attorney representing Whispering Pines Estates. It accused us of maliciously creating a hazardous condition and willful destruction of property, referring to the mud apparently, and demanded we pay for the cleaning and potential mechanical damage to their security SUV, a sum totaling several $1,000s. They also demanded we cease and desist our aggressive irrigation practices near their boundary. I immediately forwarded the letter to Ben Tracy, our lawyer. Ben's response was swift and beautiful. He drafted a reply that not only reiterated our right to manage our own land, but also countersued for damages related to the repeated trespassing, the destruction of our no trespassing signs, and the general nuisance they had created. He included copies of my meticulous logs, photos, and even a tongue-in-cheek offer to provide Whispering Pines with a consultation on drought-resistant landscaping, given their apparent difficulties with excessive moisture. Ben also pointed out that any damage to their vehicle was a direct result of their decision to ignore clearly posted warnings and trespass on private agricultural placed land undergoing active development. He finished by politely suggesting that if they wished to avoid further accidental irrigation, they should simply instruct their personnel to respect clearly demarcated property lines. We never heard back from their attorney on that particular demand for payment. The landmines, as Grandpa continued to call his irrigation system, remained active. We didn't run them constantly, just at strategic, unpredictable intervals, always during daylight hours, always when our seedbed looked like it might be drying out. For a few days, Ranger Rick and Deputy Dog, now in a different, though equally white SUV, would drive up to the edge of their property, peer across the fence at the damp patch under our oak tree, and then, after a moment of apparent deep thought, slowly back away and find somewhere else to park, well within their own territory. The message, it seemed, was finally getting through. Word of the muddy SUV incident, as it apparently became known within Whispering Pines, spread like wildfire through their community. We started hearing snippets from folks who lived there and occasionally shopped at the same feed store as us. Apparently, Prendergast's high-handedness was not universally popular, and the story of his security team getting a thorough drenching and a mud bath on neighboring barbarian lands, as one resident sarcastically put it, provided a good deal of amusement. Prendergast's authority took a bit of a hit. There were grumblings at their next HOA meeting, or so we heard, about the unnecessary antagonism with the ranch and the rather public humiliation. Some residents even started questioning the cost and actual effectiveness of their much-vaunted security patrol. As for the land itself, Grandpa decided to make the agricultural improvement project a little more permanent and aesthetically pleasing, while still serving its deterrent purpose. We brought in a load of good topsoil and properly graded the area under the oak, creating a gentle, almost unnoticeable swale that would indeed collect water. Then, instead of just grass, Grandpa had me plant a thick border of hardy, fast-growing, and impressively thorny rose bushes, the old-fashioned, wickedly spiky kind, all along our side of that particular stretch of fence line. Pretty to look at, Grandpa said, admiring his work, but a real devil to try and push through if you're not invited. The roses thrived in the occasionally irrigated soil, and within a season, they formed a dense, fragrant, and utterly impassable barrier. The "no trespassing" signs went back up, this time mounted on sturdy steel posts concreted into the ground just outside the rose barrier. We never had another issue with a Whispering Pine security parking on our land again. They learned their lesson the hard way. The oak tree remained our oak tree, its shade enjoyed only by our cattle and the occasional deer. The peace of the Bar M was restored. Looking back, it's almost funny how a simple dispute over a parking spot could escalate so dramatically. But it was never really about the parking, was it? It was about respect. Respect for property, respect for boundaries, respect for your neighbors, even if they are rural elements. Prendergast and his crew had none, and they assumed we were just dumb ranchers who'd roll over. They underestimated us. They especially underestimated Grandpa, a man who understands that sometimes the best way to deal with a bully is not with fists, but with a well-placed sprinkler head and a deep understanding of mud. He proved that ingenuity and a bit of old-fashioned grit can triumph over arrogance and entitlement any day of the week. The whole affair taught me a valuable lesson. Stand your ground, know your rights, document everything, and never, ever underestimate the cunning of an old man who loves his land. And sometimes, a little targeted soil moisture enhancement is all it takes to make your point crystal clear. So that's the story of Grandpa's landmines and how we reclaimed our little patch of peace from the HOA next door. It just goes to show, you don't always need a lawyer in a courtroom to win your battles. Sometimes, a bit of clever engineering and a healthy dose of stubborn resolve will do the trick just fine. What's the wildest HOA encounter you've ever had or heard about? I'd love to read your stories in the comments below. Trust me, I read them all. And if you enjoyed our little tale of rancher justice, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Until next time, keep your fences mended and your sprinklers at the ready. You never know when you might need them.